experience the strongest radio allowable by law. Secrets will be revealed. Myths dispelled. From the studio gym where excuses never apply, it's Superhuman Radio with your host, Carl Lenore.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of Superhuman Radio. I'm really excited about today's show, and it focuses on children. Today, we're going to be talking with a returning guest, someone who actually I've talked about on the show a lot. Those of you who have been listening have heard me mention Dr. Martin Blaser's name before because of his book, Missing Microbes. Excuse me, I'm congested today. No doubt the humidity and the mold in the air here in Louisville, Kentucky. His book is a seminal work, and he just informed me that it's been translated into 20 somewhat languages now. The book really looked at the effects of this wonderful, and when we talk about this, people get upset with me. Well, antibiotics save lives. Yes, absolutely. Appendix surgery saves lives, but you don't just give it to everybody unless they really need the surgery, you know? And I think that physicians today have been pushed to prescribe antibiotics by parents for their children because the parents feel like, oh, you didn't do anything. I came here, I paid my copay, and that's it. Go home, wait a week, and he'll be better. So doctors feel compelled to give them something, and they feel like the most innocuous and one thing that they can give that doesn't have any quote unquote negative effects is antibiotics, but that's not true. And Dr. Blaser was really the first one to kind of sew it all together and show people that they're not harmless, depending on what you consider harm. And we're going to talk about his latest study that shows the effects on the young brain from giving children antibiotics. And again, I'm not suggesting that people not save lives with antibiotics, but I am suggesting that you don't just give them away like candy. So we're going to get into that. Then later in the show, we're going to talk about EWG, the Environmental Working Group, has published a paper showing that what is considered acceptable levels of radiation from tablets, smartphones, really even cordless phones, which are probably the worst offenders, is not really safe for children after all. And that's going to be hard to make an industry turn on a dime. But if it's for children's health, they may get some attention. So we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the show. Before we start any of this, we have to thank our title sponsor, and that's Legendary Foods, the makers of the Tasty Pastry. This started out as a Pop-Tart with less than 1 gram of sugar and 20 grams of protein. But it's become so much more. It tastes like cake when you eat it. The texture, the mouthfeel. You really will think you're eating a piece of pastry, but you're not. You're not cheating. You're eating something that fits in your dietary guidelines. 20 grams of protein, less than 1 gram of sugar. So many amazing flavors. If you go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary and use the code SHR10, you'll save 10% off. And we do have a secret word today. If you listen during the commercial break, you'll hear a secret word. Email that to onair@superhumanradio.net along with your mailing address, and we'll send you a free box of tasty pastries, compliments of Ron Penna, who is the inventor, so to speak, of the tasty pastry. So there you go. Okay, let me get my guest on now. And he is... Now, are you originally from the East Coast, Dr. Blaser?
Yeah, I was born in New York City.
Okay, so you and I have a very similar heritage. I know that you are at Rutgers now, which is, I think, in Piscataway. So we're both East Coast guys, so that's good. Very good. I have to say this in front of you for the audience to hear. Missing Microbes is a seminal work. There is so much amazing information in Missing Microbes that actually fills in a lot of the gaps of what we thought we knew about antibiotics. And I've mentioned you on this show. I've talked about missing microbes. I've recommended guests read Missing Microbes because this book is so important. It may not be sexy, but when you really start to look at it and distill this information down, you can actually track the changes in population and the introduction of antibiotics, and it's not all good. In fact, I learned from you that antibiotics shift the microbiome towards making a person more obese. And we can follow the obesity line. It really just follows along with the introduction and use of antibiotics. Fascinating stuff. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you for your kind words. And I'm happy to talk to you and your audience.
So let's talk about your most recent study first, and then we'll talk about missing microbes a little bit. Your most recent study looked at brain development and the introduction of antibiotics. How was this designed?
Yeah, the truth is, in order to understand the study, we have to go back to the ideas of missing microbes first.
Okay.
And that is that humans have a partnership with our microbes. This is our microbiome that we have is not accidental. We have evolved with it over millions and millions of years. There's a resemblance between our microbiome and that of monkeys. Everything points to the fact that it's part of our ancestry. And what's really important is that when a baby begins life, they have no microbiome. They begin with a blank slate, and then they gradually acquire microbes. And these microbes are taking part in how a baby develops, how they develop their immunity, how they develop their metabolism, and we think how they develop their thinking and their cognition as well. So that's what we have learned over the last decade, that our microbes are our partners. So in this study, we asked, and it was a study of mice, because we can do much more with mice than we can do with human children. Essentially, we gave mice antibiotics or not, right in the first days of life. And then we showed, as expected, that the antibiotics were going to shift the microbiome, that there was no surprise there, but we showed that. And at the same time, we sacrificed the mice and we looked at their brains. And we looked at two areas of the brain that are very important in development, in early life development, especially emotional development. One is called the amygdala, and another is an area called the frontal cortex. And we picked those areas because of they play key roles in how the brain develops its cognition. And we asked, we used techniques that would allow us to look at the expression of genes in the brain. And they're standardized techniques. We applied these techniques to the brains of the mice that received the antibiotics versus the others. And we asked, are there any...
You actually dropped out, Dr. Blaser. If you can hear me, the last thing we heard was we asked if there are any. Can you hear me, Dr. Blaser?
Mice.
Dr. Blaser, you dropped out. We lost your audio completely from your camera. Can
really?
you just go back to just go back to where you said we asked, and then we didn't hear the question. We asked.
Let's see which we asked. Well, after we looked at their microbiome, and then we looked at their brains.
Okay.
And we asked, is the expression of genes in their brains similar or different between the antibiotics and the control mice that did not receive antibiotics?
Right.
And we've really found very big differences between the two. And the differences involve different pathways that already have been linked to neurodevelopment. So this was a preliminary study. It was not. It actually took us some time to do, but it wasn't a huge study. But it already establishes the principle that if we give antibiotics to mice by mouth, and it's going to affect their microbiome, and there will be changes in how their brain develops.
Now, do we know if mothers who take antibiotics while pregnant, are antibiotics something that get across the placenta into the baby?
The antibiotics depends on the antibiotic, but they can get across the placenta to the baby. But you see, I think that may not be that important because those babies don't have a microbiome.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
They're in the womb. They don't have the effect is not directly from the antibiotics to the brain. It's the effect of the antibiotic on the microbiome.
Right.
And now the altered microbiome is talking to the brain in a different way than it did before.
So explain the relationship between, for lack of better terms, neurotransmission and the microbiome. How does the microbiome influence how the brain functions?
Yeah, so that's a wonderful question. There are a lot of people who are working on that question right now, and there are several different ways that it works. Firstly, there is hard wiring between the brain and the gut. There are nerves. There's a nerve called the vagus nerve. That's a hard wire that sends signals from the brain down to the gut and signals up from the gut to the brain. This has long been known. And now it's known that if you alter the microbiome, you're going to alter those signals through the vagus. So that's the first pathway. Second is that the microbiome produces chemicals that are in the bloodstream and that go to the brain. And third is that the microbiome interacts with tissues in the intestine, in the intestinal wall, that produce molecules that are neurotransmitters. For example, there's a molecule called serotonin. It's a very important molecule in brain signaling. And it turns out that the gut produces 80% of the serotonin in the body. And there have been studies now that if you alter the microbiome, you'll alter serotonin production as well. So we have these at least three different pathways by how the microbiome, what's happening in the microbiome can affect what's happening to the brain. And what's really important is those early days, months of life when the brain is developing. I think there's some evidence that it's important later in life, but the big effect is early.
Do they even give babies antibiotics? I mean, I was probably introduced to antibiotics when I was at least, let's say, 5 or 6 years old. And my brain is still forming then, obviously. But do they give babies antibiotics prior to that for any kind of rescue events or something like that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, babies are getting, per capita, babies are getting the most antibiotics of any age group because babies are very vulnerable. And if the baby has a fever and the doctor is afraid, they'll put the baby on antibiotics. And many times that's completely justified. I have no problem with that. Right,
your life saving. Right.
That's right. But sometimes it's not, and it's not needed. And in a young baby or a young child, we know that kids get lots of respiratory infections. They get throat infections and ear infections and nose infections. But if you look around Europe, you'll see that there's a big variation in how many courses of antibiotics kids get in different countries. In Italy, they get probably 6 times as many courses of antibiotics as they do in Switzerland. And in fact, those kids in Italy and Switzerland, there isn't a difference in the rate of them dying of infection. It's just that the Italian doctors are using a lot more than the Swiss doctors. If we look at the comparison between the US and Sweden, Sweden is using 40% fewer antibiotics than we do across every age. Kids in Sweden aren't dying from ear infections or meningitis or sepsis. They're doing just fine. That suggests to me that at least 40% of the antibiotics we're using are unnecessary.
Can we extrapolate out, understanding that there's no way to actually say this unequivocally, but can we extrapolate out from some of the brain changes you saw to any of the things that young children are faced with today, being on a spectrum, Asperger's, ADHD, or anything? Can you look at this and go, oh, this makes sense for this particular outcome because this part of the brain has been changed?
Yeah. So that's a very good question. It's a really important question. I mean, how do you show that two things are related? One of the ways that we show it is we do models in mice. But another way that we do it is by doing epidemiologic studies in people, studies of cohorts of people. So earlier this year, I was involved in a study with colleagues at the Mayo Clinic. And we did a study asking, is there a relationship between exposure to antibiotics of children in the first 2 years of life and getting illnesses up to the age of 14? And this study was conducted in children in Olmsted County, Minnesota. That's the county where the Mayo Clinic is. Mm-hmm. Virtually everybody in that county gets their care from the Mayo Clinic, so they have very good records. Yeah. We studied 14,000 children there. We had the information on their antibiotic exposure before the age of 2. We have records up to the age of 14. We studied 10 different diagnoses. We studied allergic problems like asthma, hay fever, food allergy, celiac disease. We studied obesity and overweight. These are metabolic disease. We studied neurodevelopmental things such as autism, learning disabilities, ADHD. We studied 10 different diagnoses. And what we found is that the kids who were exposed to antibiotics in the first 2 years of life were significantly more likely to develop illness in 8 of those 10 conditions. And that included ADHD, and it included learning disabilities. So that was the first major finding. The second finding is we found that the more courses of antibiotics they received in the first 2 years of life, the higher their risk. So that tells you that there's some kind of risk relationship. And the third thing we found is that the number, the time in life that they were exposed made a difference. In other words, exposure in the first 6 months of life was worse, was associated with a worse outcome than exposure in the second 6 months of life. And that was worse than in the first year of life. In other words, the earlier the exposure, the bigger the impact of the antibiotics on risk of these diseases. And the fourth thing we found is that all antibiotics were not equal. There was a class of antibiotics called cephalosporins, which have been gaining in popularity in recent years in treatment of kids that were particularly associated with bad outcomes.
Why is it gaining popularity? Is there a lot of reason?
That's gaining popularity because you can give it orally, which is very important in kids, and it has a long half-life, so you only have to give it once or twice a day.
Yeah, right.
So they're great drugs for the reason, but all of this work continues the thesis that I developed in Missing Microbes. Getting antibiotics has cost. Antibiotics are not free. They're not biologically free. There is risk of long-term outcomes. So therefore, of course, we have to use antibiotics much better.
One of the ways that the microbes are seeded into an infant is breastfeeding. The baby picks up the microbes on the areola where the baby suckles. There are microbes in the breast milk itself. And then, of course, the environment fills in the rest of the way.
Yeah, let me just say that the microbes from the breast, I would say that that's a minor constituent. What's important is the milk, breast milk, has constituents in it that have evolved to feed the beneficial microbes. There are the breast milk has sugars that human
oligosaccharides. They're only there to feed the microbes. That's all they do.
Only there to feed the microbe, and they don't feed every microbe. They feed very specific microbes. It's part of the partnership between the microbes. We have evolved in a way so that breast milk produces the substances that the good microbes need, and the good microbes help us fight against bad microbes.
We talk about how young children get sick a lot. It's just assumed, well, young children, they get sick a lot. I often wonder how many of those young children who get sick a lot were formula babies as opposed to breastfed babies.
Yeah, so the rates are higher in formula babies than breastfed babies. And of course, most of those illnesses are self-limited. They get better by themselves. And doctors vary in how often they prescribe antibiotics. You know, when the kid comes in with a runny nose, some doctors never prescribe antibiotics, some always prescribe, and then there are a lot in between. And again, in Sweden, those doctors, it's more shifted toward not prescribing than the United States. So If we could control all that unnecessary use of antibiotics, I think we would have an impact on the development of a lot of these new diseases.
There's a lot of discussion about transgenerational epigenetics today. We know now that even the father's sperm germ lines change with the exposure to, let's say, a harsh chemical. It's not just the mothers that are passing on this to the offspring. We also know that transgenerational epigenetics has more than just health effects. We know that there's intelligence that's passed on from mother and father to the baby. Fascinating study that showed male rodents were shocked every time they were allowed to smell cherry, and then they were put into general population of other rodents. They copulated, that their offspring were tracked, and when their offspring smelled cherry, they became panic-stricken and frozen with fear. Even though they didn't get shocked, that intelligence was passed along from the father to the offspring. So transgenerational epigenetics is really becoming very fascinating to me, because it's more than just the outcome of your genes on health. It's much more. Do we see any transgenerational effects from babies that were given antibiotics and the changes in their microbiome? Do we see that going on? Or is because the microbiome is seeded at birth, we have a break to start fresh with?
Well, you've anticipated all the things I'm going to say, but I'll just summarize it, that there's a big transgenerational effect on the microbiome as well. Because remember, as you point out, the initial inoculum that a baby gets is from their mom. Now, if the mom has been taking antibiotics, then her microbiome is different than if she hadn't. So there's already a founder effect, an original effect. We did a study in mice that was published a couple of years ago. It was in Nature Microbiology, in which we did an experiment to ask this particular question. We looked at mice that were prone to get a form of inflammatory bowel disease, or IBD. This was a special kind of mouse called the IL-10 deficient mice. And we studied germ-free mama mice, and then we gave them poop from another mouse that was either normal or had received antibiotics. So we gave these germ-free mice either antibiotic-perturbed microbiome or normal microbiome. The mice were colonized with these new microbiota. The mice gave birth to their pups, and then we studied the pups when they were middle-aged, and we looked at their bowel. And the mice whose mom got the perturbed microbiota, they had much more inflammation in their gut than the mice that didn't. So this was a very clean experiment. The point was they had much more inflammation. Those baby mice never saw an antibiotic in the course of the experiment. Their mom never saw an antibiotic. All they saw was the perturbed microbiota. So the signal was in the microbiota. It's an epigenetic effect as well, not just on host genes. It's involving the microbiome.
That's fascinating. Now that really is fascinating. Do you think that we'll ever see a time where, when your lawn gets loaded with crabgrass, right? Your lawn guy says, well, we're just going to kill it and we're going to reseed, start from scratch, tabula rasa. Is there going to ever be a time where we can do that with humans, where I picked up bad microbiome pathogens and I just want to clear it all out and start from scratch, put only good stuff in there? Do you think that'll ever happen?
I think it's going to be tough. I think what we know about developmental biology is that there are windows. There's a window that's open for a while, and then after a while it's closed. There are a lot of parents whose kids are very short, and they want their kid to be tall. And there are things that can be done, but after a certain age, you can't do it anymore.
Right.
The window has closed. So it's pretty clear that the window is early for the reseeding. And exactly how long, maybe the window starts to shut, and exactly when's the last time you can get it before it's completely closed, we don't know. But from what's been done, it's likely that this window gradually shutting is the real story.
So what do parents, because I have lots more questions. We're going to go into a break and I have lots more questions, but what do parents do when they have a child that's under 3 years old and their doctor wants to prescribe an antibiotic? Should they say to their doctor, look, does he really need this antibiotic, or you think he'll get better on his own? I mean, we're not talking about life-threatening things.
That's right. That's what they should say. They should say, doctor, does my child need an antibiotic, or can we get away without it? Many times the doctors are reacting to pressure from the parents. The parents want to come out with a treatment. So the situation is marginal, but they're going to give them the antibiotic as well. So if we had real open communication, I think we could cut down a lot of antibiotic use. And the idea is, because if you think that antibiotics are free, then every parent says, why not give my child an antibiotic? But if there's a cost, that there's some increased risk of overweight, there's some risk of autism, of asthma, et cetera, then maybe the answer is let's wait a day and see how the child is doing. If they get better, we're done and there's no antibiotic. If not, then if necessary, we'll give the antibiotic later. If we just have some patience and good communication, we will do a lot better.
Before we take the break, I want to plug the book, and you can actually go to, I think my show is 1740. Let me see. I think I opened it. 1392 in April of 2014, when I first had Dr. Blaser on to talk about the book Missing Microbes. You can also just get the book. The book is called Missing Microbes, and it's available where finer books are sold. I'm sure Amazon has it and other magazine book services where you can get it. But it's a fantastic book. And even if you don't have children, you should read it, because once you read it, you'll look back at yourself and go, oh, now I see what happened. Because I was given antibiotics at a young age for quite a few things. My mother took Librium when she was pregnant with me. As you remember, that was one of the early benzodiazepines, Librium.
Well, then you're younger than I thought.
Oh, really? And how old do you think I am? I'm 63. How old did you think I was?
Well, Librium, yeah, I guess that's right. I guess Librium was around then.
My mother smoked cigarettes, took Librium, and I was a bottle baby. I wasn't breastfed because they said, oh no, formula is better than human breast milk. And my mother was first generation American from Italy. They believed what the doctor said. So I came into this world stacked with the odds stacked against me already. And I also got a lot of antibiotics because I was sick a lot. I had the croup cough. I had to have my tonsils removed. I was always getting sick, and the doctors are always prescribing antibiotics. So now I fought with my weight most of my life. And after I read your book, I thought, this makes so much sense, because my body is better at extracting energy and reducing energy output because of the shift in my microbiome, because of all those antibiotics I got as a kid. It's fascinating to me. Again, that's my cue. We'll be right back from this break. Stay tuned. I keep saying the number one killer is insulin resistance. Managing blood sugar is the key to living long and aging well. But we all like to eat starchy carbohydrates and sugars from time to time. How do I manage this? I use a product called Blood Sugar Breakthrough by Bioptimizers. This easy-to-take supplement is the result of numerous tests to find the absolute best formula for maintaining healthy blood sugar. Blood Sugar Breakthrough works to safely lower blood sugar after meals so that you can maintain a healthy weight and redirect carbohydrates to your muscles where they can be burned as energy. This means you'll avoid the worst effects of high blood sugar, like weight gain and advanced aging, while enjoying more stable energy, mental clarity, and fewer cravings. Go to shrnetwork.biz/blood sugar and save 10% with code SHR10 today. If you've listened to Superhuman Radio for any length of time, you know I'm a big proponent of peptides. One of my favorites is GHKCU, the blue copper peptide. It has the ability to repair and regenerate more youthful expressions of skin cells, reversing the signs of aging. Restora Cell's Stem Cell Awakening Serum, along with their other products, contain potent formulations of blue copper peptide and only the highest quality organic organic ingredients. Superhuman Radio listeners can now save 25% site-wide. Buy their complete set and receive a free exfoliating cleanser. Go to shrnetwork.biz/blue and use the code SHR25. That's SHR25. Remodel your skin today. Antibiotic. Knoll Creek Hemp Company's Delta 8 soft chews are the premier Delta 8 product on the market today. Knoll Creek's Delta 8 is produced from high-quality hemp-derived CBD oil, and soft chews are manufactured using proprietary nano-emulsification technique that ensures the Delta 8 soft chew will timely deliver the desired effects cleanly and consistently from piece to piece. In a space where at least 70% of the products fail to meet label claims and where most users of conventional hemp products are left disappointed, Knoll Creek's Delta 8 soft chews are a product you can trust. Visit shrnetwork.biz/Delta8. That's DELTA and the number 8, and use the code SHR20 to get 20% off your first order today. Every day, there's a new wellness trend. Eat that. Do this. Avoid those. How do you know where to start or who to trust? Inside Tracker helps you cut through the noise by analyzing your blood, your DNA, your lifestyle, and your fitness tracker to provide you with a science-backed, trackable action plan on how to live, age, and perform better. Personalized, one-size-fits-one recommendations to help you optimize you. For a limited time, Inside Tracker is offering Superhuman Radio listeners 25% off the entire store. Go to shrnetwork.biz/Inside Tracker, INSIDETRACKER, to save 25% off. Change begins on the inside. Redcon One's new BAR bar is the ultimate soft-baked protein-packed snack bar, powered by peanut butter. Perfect for while on the go to help curb hunger or sneaky sweet tooth cravings. With 20 grams of protein, use as a meal replacement bar or when you're in need of a high-protein snack. Eat a Redcon One bar as a midday snack or for fuel before an intense training session. Go to shrnetwork.biz/Redcon1 and use the code SHR25 and save 25% off these delicious bars today. I would easily say that I am the hugest proponent you will ever meet to doing anything that will improve the quality of my sleep. And that's because sleep is linked to just about every metabolic disorder we see in our population today. One of the easiest things you can do to improve the quality of your sleep is to get a pillow that can be shaped into the exact form factor that allows you to get your best night's sleep. And that is MyPillow. I've been sleeping with MyPillow for a few years now, and I can tell you that when I have to travel and stay in hotels, I don't get a good night's sleep because I don't have MyPillow with me. Right now, you can save up to 60% off of everything offered to improve the quality of your sleep at shrnetwork.biz/MyPillow when you use the code SHR. Or you can call toll-free 800-889-4938. And remember to use code SHR to save up to 60% off of everything at their website.
Move over, superheroes. This is the Superhuman Channel.
Welcome back. We're talking with Dr. Martin Blaser, author of the book Missing Microbes, about the effects of antibiotics on young children's brain. And this is really important. I mean, this is not something you should just dust under the rug and go, oh, well, can't worry about that. Now, Katrina Miller points something out, and it's probably my mother's case too, because my mother worked as a beautician. My father was a truck driver. I got dropped off at my grandparents' house every day until I was old enough to start going to school. We just came through a shutdown. People had to alter the way they work because their kids were home all through 2020. Parents don't want to stay home and take care of a sick child. It's inconvenient. But I guess the real question is taking the round of antibiotics going to speed their ability to get back to work any faster?
Well, Carl, you hit the nail on the head. There were studies done starting in the 1950s to look at whether antibiotics made kids better when they had upper respiratory infections, runny nose, sore throat, etc. And in general, there was no effect. However, antibiotics have value if a child has a strep throat, not to change the duration of the strep infection, because that doesn't change, but to reduce the risk that they'll develop rheumatic fever, which is a very serious problem. But basically, antibiotics don't help the child who's got the acute illness because most of them are viral. They're not bacterial at all. What we actually need in the field is that we need better diagnostics. so that we can differentiate between the viral infections and the bacterial infections. And not most of the bacterial infections also do not need antibiotics.
Do you
They
think we'll,
resolve by themselves.
do you think we'll ever see a smart antibiotic that selectively goes after this pathogen, but not that good microbe?
I hope so. In fact, I mentioned it in Missing Microbes. What the whole thrust of the discovery of antibiotics was to discover broad spectrum antibiotics, and antibiotics so that no matter what your infection was, that antibiotic would kill the organism. And that works as long as you're not thinking about the microbiome. But the problem with the broad spectrum antibiotic is that it affects all the bacteria. When you take an antibiotic, it's affecting all the bacteria in your body, the bad one and all the good ones. So what we really need are narrow spectrum antibiotics, antibiotics that are targeted for specific organisms. We need a strepsilin. We need an E. coli-cilin, that kind of situation. Right now, the marketplace is broken. We don't. Why would a doctor do a $200 test when they can prescribe a $5 antibiotic?
Antibiotic, yeah, right.
Right. So the whole model, the whole model has to be fixed. But I'm hoping that we will develop narrow spectrum antibiotics. Yes.
Yeah, someday. And I want to talk to you about something else. I just want to read this so that the listening audience knows. That Katrina Miller said she was a nanny. They always had antibiotics in the refrigerator. They sent their kids to school and didn't tell the school they were sick, just kept giving them antibiotics. That's horrible. That's a horrible, horrible thing. It's actually reckless, really, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, part of it, of course, is based on the idea that the antibiotics have great value. And the point that I keep making is that the value in young children with mild infections is much less than we think, and the cost is much more than we think. So there's been kind of a lack of transparency. Once we start looking at it a little better, I think we will cut down on antibiotic use.
So there has emerged a new phenotype in my mind in the past couple years, given everything that's going on in our country. I call them fact-resistant humans. That even when they're shown something that's true and verifiable, they refuse to believe it anyway. The reason I have this little preamble is you told me that your book is now translated into 20
languages.
20 languages, which means that you are now reaching a lot of doctors, I would imagine. Are you getting any kind of pushback or any Martin, this is much ado about nothing? Because some of them may feel a little guilt, like, wow, I give kids antibiotics if they fart. It's like, maybe I shouldn't have been doing that, but they don't want to say that out loud. What do you think?
Well, in addition to writing the book, I speak to groups of doctors. In fact, that's one of my highest priorities. If a group of clinicians ask me to speak, I always say yes, because I want to educate them. That's a really important audience. And they always listen to me politely, and they often say, I agree. Then sometimes they say, well, that's true for other doctors, but it's not true for me. It's not true in my practice. So, and sometimes they say, yeah, I see your point, but maybe it's not that important. Maybe it's much smaller than you think. So there is some pushback. One of the main things that we have found is that there's tremendous variation in how doctors prescribe antibiotics. I mentioned this before. There was a study that was published from the Children's Hospital of Pennsylvania in CHOP, one of the best children's hospitals in the country. And it was a study of 29 pediatric practices affiliated with the hospital. And they looked at per capita antibiotic prescribing for the practices. And the variation between the practice that prescribed the least and the practice that prescribed the most was 100%. Wow. And when they looked at broad spectrum antibiotics, the variation was 400%. So there's everywhere we look at it, there's variation in antibiotic prescribing. Some doctors just give an antibiotic for everything, and some hardly give it, and most of the others are in the middle. And I'm trying to shift that line toward the ones that give it less.
Is there time for there to be prescribing standards for antibiotics, you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's been recognized for at least 30 years that antibiotics are overprescribed in childhood. But the problem is that everybody thinks it's the other patient. And one of the problems is that the whole fragmentation of medical care works against it. Doctors are spending 10 minutes seeing a patient. Half the time they're spending typing. They're not really examining patients carefully. They're worried that they're going to get sued if there's a bad effect. So the default is give an antibiotic. At some point, probably a doctor will get sued for prescribing antibiotics. Then maybe it'll even out.
Swing back. Right.
The point is to carefully examine a child and determine, do they need antibiotics or not.
Mm-hmm.
That's why parents should bring their kids to the doctor for the doctor to evaluate how sick is my child and what's the best form of treatment. Not bringing the patient to the doctor to say, give me an antibiotic. It's to get a careful evaluation by a professional who can then say, your child, thankfully your child isn't that ill and this should run its course. That is the correct answer most of the time.
So what are your thoughts and opinions about probiotics? I took a very, very large dose of VSL number 3 for about 2 years. And I actually developed horrible digestive problems. And I had to stop using them. And I had to wait it out for my gut to kind of go back to. In fact, I did a round of Xifaxan, and that straightened me out. But I actually gave myself some sort of digestive problem by administering an over-the-counter probiotic. If some is good, more is better. And 900 billion CFUs a day, and I screwed my stomach up. What do you think about this whole probiotic fad? I mean, I think they're important, but that's why we should be cautious with them.
Yeah. So, probiotics are a miracle in marketing. We have tens of millions of people in this country and in other countries taking probiotics, but there are so many different forms of probiotics. Some have 1 bacteria, some have 5 bacteria. Sometimes the bacteria are living, sometimes they're dead. The combinations are different. The doses are different. So to say probiotics, it's kind of saying, I went to the library and I got a book.
Right.
There are a lot of different kinds of probiotics. So that's the first point. Second point is that in general, the makers of the probiotics are making all kinds of claims. They're not allowed to make health claims, but they make things like strengthen your immunity, give you better digestive health, whatever digestive health might be, kind of vague claims, but almost none of them have been rigorously tested. So do they work? Your guess is as good as mine. And there's evidence in some cases that certain of them do work for certain conditions. There's evidence that certain of them don't. Mostly it's untested. And the people who make this aren't particularly interested in testing them because they're making a living selling them now.
Yeah, they just want to go to market. Yeah.
Yeah, and doctors, by the way, sometimes the patient comes in, I've taken an antibiotic, can I take something to make it better? And they are prescribing probiotics, again, based on very, very slim evidence. Very little at all.
I've seen that. There's a couple very large nutraceutical companies that market only through doctors' offices. And they actually sell a probiotic that you're supposed to take 8 hours before or 4 hours before or 4 hours after you take an antibiotic. And I'm thinking, wouldn't the probiotic get killed by the antibiotic? And I understand the window, like it's not in your stomach at the same time, but I don't understand the logic between taking a probiotic and an antibiotic at the same time. I would think they would potentially cancel each other out.
Yeah. So you see, if you're a believer, then you believe that probiotics are going to help you. So there was a very interesting study that was done in Israel a couple of years ago in both mice and people, in which the mice and people received antibiotics and then were given a probiotic or not. And the question is, whose microbiome would recover faster? The individuals who got the probiotic or not? And the doctors, the layperson will say, well, they did better if they got the probiotic. But in fact, the answer was the opposite. After you take an antibiotic, the microbiome will be perturbed and it will generally come back, maybe not fully, but it will generally come back over time. We know that. But after the probiotic, it came back more slowly. And that's not surprising because, as you pointed out, the probiotic is a perturbation. It's a second hit.
Right.
They got the first hit, the antibiotic. Now they're getting a second hit. So maybe there are probiotics that work, but they'd have to be tested to make sure that they work.
I have lots more questions. We have one more commercial break in this interview, Dr. Blaser, and then I'll be letting you go. But I just want to put the book up one more time. So if you want to get the book, it's called Missing Microbes. It's in 20 different languages now. So no matter where you are listening to the show, I know we have listeners in Colombia, in all over the world.
It's translated into Spanish.
There you go. Missing Microbes. And it's an amazing book. Everybody should read it because the microbiome is becoming more and more popular, more important. Some people calling it the next frontier in medicine. And you can't talk about the microbiome without talking about antibiotics, because the reason our microbiome is so effed up today is because the exposure to antimicrobials and antibiotics. Let's be clear about this. And the difference between an antimicrobial and antibiotic is the dose and the duration. Any antimicrobial that's sprayed on crops, glyphosate is a powerful antimicrobial. And if you're eating foods that are loaded with glyphosate over time, day in and day out, you're going to have disrupted microbiome again. So if you really have to understand what's going on, and this book does it. Again, the book is called Missing Microbes. We're going to take one quick commercial break. We'll be right back, and we've got questions to answer. So stay tuned. I'll get to every comment and question. Be right back. Remember those rectangular toaster pastries you used to love when you were a kid? Well, Legendary Foods has just made them better. The new cake-style tasty pastry is like nothing you've ever had before. With 20 grams of high-quality protein and less than 1 gram of sugar, you'll feel like you're cheating, but you're not. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary and use the code SHR10 to save 10% off your purchase of tasty pastries. Now available in cookies and cream, red velvet cake, birthday cake, blueberry, strawberry, brown sugar cinnamon, and hot fudge sundae. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary and use code SHR10 today. Hey, this is Carl Lenore. Superhuman Radio is the longest running health, fitness, and anti-aging podcast in the world, going into our 16th year of continuous production. If you have a product that you think would appeal to the superhuman nation, we can get you on the air quickly and inexpensively to help promote your brand. Join the ranks of some of the largest and most successful companies in the world who know how great it is to be affiliated with Superhuman Radio. Contact Dan Kapitsky today. That's DAN.KOPITZKE at superhumanradio.net to learn more. If you spend any amount of time sitting while at work like I do, I have the chair for you. The Backstrong chair from All 33 is the most comfortable office chair I've ever sat in. That's the truth. Their patented technology allows your body to move the way it's supposed to move while you sit. Designed by a chiropractor to position your pelvis in a way that stacks all 33 of your vertebrae into perfect alignment. The benefits of this ideal posture include relief of back pain, deeper breathing, better digestion, improved circulation, greater focus, sharper memory, and more productivity. Start experiencing these benefits today. Go to shrnetwork.biz/move and use the code SHR100 for a $100 discount on your Backstrong chair. Being superhuman means being conscientious about the choices we make. White Oak Pastures is superhuman when it comes to raising livestock. They're committed to animal welfare, land regeneration, and rural revival. They responsibly manage the entire process from the pasture to your doorstep. high quality, pasture raised, great tasting meat from a farm you can trust. Full nose to tail selections. They even have options for your pet. Go to shrnetwork.biz/white oak and use code SHR20 to save 20% off your entire first order. Antibiotic. Is there something interfering with your happiness or ability to achieve your goals? BetterHelp can help. They will assess your needs and match you with a licensed therapist. This is not a self-help or crisis line. It's professional counseling done securely online. They have a broad range of experts and are available worldwide without having to wait in an uncomfortable waiting room. Get the help you need and start living a happier life today. Go to shrnetwork.biz/betterhelp. That's better, HELP, and receive 10% off your first month of counseling when you use the code SHR. I need to share with you all a revolutionary new wearable technology called HapB. HapB allows you to enjoy the effects of caffeine, alcohol, nicotine, melatonin, and muscle relaxants without actually ingesting anything. Yes, really. They figured out the unique magnetic signature of each of these molecules and recorded them. Just put the HapB on, choose the signal you want, and it starts projecting the magnetic signature of that molecule that you choose, like coffee for feeling alert. Go to hapbee.com/SHR. That's HAPBEE.com/SHR to learn more and unlock an $80 discount exclusively for the Superhuman Radio listeners.
This is the Superhuman Channel, where we use oxygen for the power of good.
Welcome back. We're talking with Dr. Martin Blaser, author of Missing Microbes, a fantastic book. One of the books that, there are certain books that changed the direction of the show because of the information that was delivered, and this is one of them. I've talked before about Dr. Daniel Lieberman's book, The Story of the Human Body. That was a game changer for me. And also Dr. Milind Watvi from India and his book, Doves, Diplomats, and Diabetes, another game changer. And this book was too. This book really opened my eyes for the first time about what the microbiome potentially can do to us as a being, an organism. And it's very fascinating. So there's a question here I'm going to get up. Hold on. So Craig Hollander says, many times when an antibiotic is prescribed for secondary infection, the endotoxins in the intestines are reduced, which lessens the burden on the immune system. This enables the body to fight the initial pathogen. You have an opinion on that statement, Dr. Blaser?
I mean, this is a complicated problem that your listener is talking about. There are many different ways to look at this. I'm talking. This is a relatively uncommon situation. I'm really talking about the most common situations where people go to the doctor, they have a sore throat, they have an earache, or their child does. When you're talking about somebody who's already on treatment, they may have other problems. It's more complicated. It could go either way. That antibiotic could be helpful or not. It's hard to judge.
Are you familiar with the cathelicidine? I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right.
Cathelicidin?
Yeah, LL37.
Yes.
We've done shows about LL37 as an injectable peptide. Any thoughts on that? Because it seems to be an endogenous peptide, is that a better alternative than, say, a broad spectrum antibiotic, or is it just as broad spectrum itself?
It may be a better alternative or not. Firstly, it's mostly expressed in the gut. The real paradox of animal life is that our intestines are filled with a huge number of bacteria, any one of which can kill us. And yet we live for years. We live a long life. So we have all these defenses against the bacteria that live within us, including antimicrobial peptides, of which cathelicidin is one of them. So it's a normal part of the body's defenses against these organisms. It is relatively broad spectrum against a large number of these organisms. Does it work? That's what we do clinical trials for. How did we learn that vaccines worked? We did a clinical trial, and we saw that the people who weren't vaccinated got sick, and the people who were vaccinated had a much lower rate of illness. That's how you make progress in medical research. You do clinical trials.
I take a Z-Pack twice a year, as an anti-aging measure. Z-Pak has been approved, zithromycin has been approved by the FDA because aside from other things that it does as an antibiotic, it removes 97% of senescent cells from your body in 5 days. In one 5-day round, senescent cells, which are the accumulation of these zombie cells as we age, that, we slow down and things don't work. And it's very effective. But I often, when I do take it, I just take it twice.
Sorry, when you say it's very effective, how do you know it's effective?
Well, it's very effective in clinical trials. It's shown to remove senescent cells from human tissue.
Yeah. Okay, so let me just tell you that there have been, I'm going to tell you about 3 large studies. 2 studies, all of these were done in Europe. 2 studies were done about diabetes. One was in Denmark, one was in England. Each study had more than 1 million people in the study. These were very large studies. And the investigators asked, if you compare people who have diabetes today, who received more antibiotics in the preceding years? Those who have diabetes or those who don't? Both studies showed exactly the same thing. Those who had diabetes were more likely to have received antibiotics in the preceding years, going back as much as 15 years earlier. The third study is about kidney stones. Same kind of design. They matched 26,000 people who had kidney stones with 260,000 people who did not. And they asked who had greater exposure to antibiotics. They found that the people who had kidney stones had much greater exposure to antibiotics, sometimes years in advance of the kidney stone. Now, I don't think this is surprising because the microbiome is metabolically active. It is part of human metabolism. And with the antibiotics, we're disrupting that. So it is not shocking to me that we're finding that there could be a long-term cost.
Okay, so we're going to close with Katrina Miller's question. And that is, what repairs the microbiome? Well, let's be more specific. So we know that diet has the biggest effect on the microbiome. You can literally shift your microbiome in one day by changing your diet drastically. So is there any evidence that there are certain things that we could consume that could help us to increase the good bacteria and decrease the bad bacteria?
I would just first argue with you that diet is the most important. I will say that mom is the most important. Mom is the most important. And of course, for those of us who are adults, that happened a long time ago. But that foundation is so important. What we know is that there are certain things that are good for your microbiome. Fiber is very good for your microbiome. Diversity is good for your microbiome. In contrast, you want to avoid things that injure your microbiome, like antibiotics and other antibacterials. There are a lot of foods that have lots of antibacterial preservatives. That's what gives them longer shelf life. But when you eat them, that affects your microbiome. So the number one rule is avoid unnecessary damage. Prevention is an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Repairing the microbiome, this is where the science is. Lots of people are interested in this, trying to help with this question. And it may be that it's not one size fits all. It may be that something that would repair my wounded microbiome will be different from yours. That's the scientific frontier. The key is, I don't think we really know the answer to that yet.
Right.
But I'm hopeful in the next decade that we will.
So on closing, the book is called Missing Microbes. You can get it where finer books are sold. I suggest that everybody buy this book and read it. It's very important, especially if you plan on having children or you have young children now. This is really an important book. It'll help you. It'll arm you with the intelligence that will give you the courage to ask your doctor, I don't think I really want an antibiotic. Do you really think he needs it? Because that's where this all starts. Ultimately, the children, the parents are the stewards of the children. And if the doctor hands you an antibiotic, you can choose not to get it filled. You can choose to save it until the child looks like they need the antibiotic. There's a lot of things you can do to help your child avoid unnecessary damage to the microbiome at a young age. Dr. Blaser, always wonderful to have you on the show. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thanks for your great questions.
All right, take care. We're going to take a quick commercial break. And when we come back, we're going to stay with this discussion about our children. And we're going to be talking about the effects of RF, namely from devices like iPhones and tablets. But let's not forget cordless phones. They put out more power than anything quite often. And is there something we need to pay attention to, the levels of radiation that our children are being affected by today? So we're going to take one quick commercial break. Stay tuned. You are watching and listening to Superhuman Radio. Attention meat lovers. I've discovered a snack with just 2 ingredients, meat and salt. That is so tender and delicious, you almost can't believe it. That's right, no soy, sugar, or other crap. Our partner, Carnivore Snacks, nailed it with these mouth-watering snacks. They have a variety too, ribeye, pork loin, leg of lamb, and more, all sourced here in the USA from regenerative farms. Claim your superhuman offer from Carnivore Snacks today at shrnetwork.biz/snacks. That's SNAX. Use the code superhuman for 15% off your first order, plus a free 2-ounce pork loin. Knoll Creek Hemp Company's Delta 8 soft chews are the premier Delta 8 product on the market today. Knoll Creek's Delta 8 is produced from high-quality hemp-derived CBD oil, and soft chews are manufactured using proprietary nano-emulsification technique that ensures the Delta 8 soft chew will timely deliver the desired effects cleanly and consistently from piece to piece. In a space where at least 70% of the products fail to meet label claims and where most users of conventional hemp products are left disappointed, Knoll Creek's Delta 8 soft chews are a product you can trust. Visit shrnetwork.biz/delta8. That's DELTA and the number 8, and use the code SHR20 to get 20% off your first order today. Antibiotic. Every day there's a new wellness trend. Eat that. Do this. Avoid those. How do you know where to start or who to trust? Inside Tracker helps you cut through the noise by analyzing your blood, your DNA, your lifestyle, and your fitness tracker to provide you with a science-backed trackable action plan on how to live, age, and perform better. Personalized one-size-fits-one recommendations to help you optimize you. For a limited time, Inside Tracker is offering Superhuman Radio listeners 25% off the entire store. Go to shrnetwork.biz/inside tracker, INSIDETRACKER, to save 25% off. Change begins on the inside.
New Mass Pro Synthogen X2 just upped its own legendary game. To distance itself even further from the rest of the pack, Synthogen X2 now has double the key active ingredients. If you've ever wondered what steroid-like recovery feels like, Synthogen X2 delivers. See why others compare it favorably to powerful bodybuilding drugs at synthogen.com. Mass Pro Synthogen. When you train with it, you'll gain with it.
I need to share with you all a revolutionary new wearable technology called HapB. HapB allows you to enjoy the effects of caffeine, alcohol, nicotine, melatonin, and muscle relaxants without actually ingesting anything. Yes, really. They figured out the unique magnetic signature of each of these molecules and recorded them. Just put the HapB on, choose the signal you want, and it starts projecting the magnetic signature of that molecule that you choose, like coffee for feeling alert. Go to hapb.com/SHR. That's HAPBEE.com/SHR to learn more and unlock an $80 discount exclusively for the Superhuman Radio listeners. Redcon One's new BAR bar is the ultimate soft-baked protein-packed snack bar, powered by peanut butter. Perfect for while on the go to help curb hunger or sneaky sweet tooth cravings. With 20 grams of protein, use as a meal replacement bar or when you're in need of a high-protein snack. Eat a Redcon One bar as a midday snack or for fuel before an intense training session. Go to shrnetwork.biz/Redcon1 and use the code SHR25 and save 25% off these delicious bars today.
This is the Superhuman Channel, where brawn and brains finally meet.
Welcome back. So I'm gonna take it. I'm gonna try to pronounce your name properly. Usually before the show I ask, but we didn't have that luxury, you and I. So Dr. Uloma Uche.
Correct.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm playing the lottery today. This is good. Welcome to my show. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
you work for an organization that I can honestly use the love word when I talk about them, and that's Environmental Working Group. Most of people remember EWG when they came on the scene and they created the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. I see people walking around Whole Foods, pulling up their app to see, well, do I have to buy this organic? But EWG has done so many great things. They are an unbiased, disinterested party who just does a lot of research on things that our population should be concerned about. And I'm so excited about this particular discussion because I've been talking about the potential effects of RF for a very long time, because as a young man, early in my career, I actually owned a mobile telephone and paging company. And I have an intimate relationship with RF, and I've seen what it can do, amazing things. It's magical. I remember sitting by a spectrum analyzer, listening to a transmitter that we had on Mount Potosi between Nevada and California, listening to people talking on their phones. I wasn't eavesdropping, but just that I couldn't, like, in the air around me, these sounds were coming out of this speaker. To me, that was magic. It's amazing. But I also realized to think that that doesn't have some sort of effect on a cellular level, because we are antennas, we attenuate, is foolish if you don't think it does. So let's talk about the paper that your group recently published. And the title of the paper was, you tell me. It's a RF. So
it's gonna be.
Good.
Should I go ahead? So it's development of health-based exposure limits for radio frequency radiation from wireless devices using a benchmark dose approach. For children. And I love that it's for children, because if you said this about adults, people will go, oh, what else is going to kill us? But when you start talking about children, like, oh, wait a minute, we need to pay attention. So how was this study designed? Okay, this is a very good question, and thank you so much for having me on the show. We kind of used the incident data, from the 2018 National Toxicology Program study, to estimate an exposure limit that would adequately, protect children and adults against adverse impacts associated with radiofrequency radiation exposure. Now, one thing about this NTP study is the fact that it's one of the largest long-term studies, on the health effects of radiofrequency radiation exposure. Okay, and so what specific parameters did you look for to come up with this idea that maybe children are exposed to too much RF right now? Now, one thing we need to understand that there are tons of research out there, that, link radio frequency radiation exposure to, adverse impacts, right? And looking at children, you see that these are just growing bodies, right? And they tend to be any impact, any exposure to environmental contaminants like this radio frequency radiation we're talking about, they tend to have a higher adverse impact associated with exposure. So and looking at radio frequency radiation, you see looking at the brain, for example, the child's skull is kind of small, right? And the body's kind of growing, right? So when we are kind of exposing our children to radio frequency radiation, we are not looking at just the effects that are going to have now. It's more like a long-term effect they're going to be having. Looking at the tons of literature that have suggested, that have linked, radio frequency radiation to even adverse impacts such as increased risks of cancer, neurological disorders, developmental effects, and so on. So it's really important for us to consider how we expose our children, to this radio frequency radiation that kind of gets emitted from, wireless devices. And so when we talk about wireless devices, everybody says, well, I don't let my kid play with the iPhone. But I want to tell people something. So when the FCC first came out with cellular, I was in the mobile telephone business, IMTS, when cellular first came on the scene. When they first came out with Motorola made the first cellular system in Chicago. And I happened to be living in Las Vegas, and it's because I had a mobile telephone system already, I was approached by the cellular
companies, hey, let's move all your customers to cellular. The Motorola 8000, for those of you who remember it, the big phone that, you know, Gordon Gekko carried on the beach when he was talking to Bud Fox in Wall Street, and he was trading in Japan. If you remember the antenna was about this long, but only the very tip of it, actually the top 2.5 inches of it, was the antenna. The big part was a mast, and that was to get the antenna away from the eyes, because Motorola had already done human and rodent studies that their Motorola 800 megahertz trunking system, which 900 megahertz was what cellular was, if it radiated into the eyes of the rodents, it gave them cataracts. So they said, hey, let's put that thing on a fishing pole all the way up here, and that way we don't have it radiating into people's faces and we don't have any lawsuits now. Now think about this for a second. Motorola knew that the 800 megahertz RF that phone was putting out, and don't forget it was restricted to 0.8 of a watt. 0.8 of a watt, not even a full watt. Mobiles could be 3 watts because the antenna was on your car. They didn't care. But the one that was being carried by the human, that it was radiating into his skull, they knew it was changing tissue in the eye. So everybody in that industry has known forever. Now, let's move forward. Great study by Egypt. They took an 800 megahertz cellular phone, some of the early ones, put it beneath the cage of rodents and exposed them on the standby mode, not receiving a call, not making a call, for 8 hours a day, and sperm motility dropped to near 0. Now, we have a lot of people that can't make babies right now. What's going on? Do the guys carry their cell phones in their pockets? Who knows? So we have known gradually. I talked about a study on this show in 2008 that showed that exposure to cellular telephone radiation, even in the standby mode, made rodent pups born without mirror neurons in their brain. Mirror neurons are when you look up at your mother and she looks down and smiles at you proprioceptively, you know you're smiling back. When babies don't have mirror neurons, they don't do that. They call that being on the spectrum. I mean, it goes on and on and on. But we love these damn things so much, we just don't want to give them up. I don't want to believe the bad news. That's good for me. No, don't tell me it's bad for me. Well, there's something worse in your home. Your router. Your router can put out 5 watts. Your cordless base station, it can put out 5 watts. And it's using these same frequencies, 1.2, 1.4 gigahertz. So it's not just your cell phone we're talking about. You are literally living in a soup of RF. I have a spectrum analyzer right up here. And one day I thought, let me give people a something fun to look at. And I videoed just me sitting in this office and all the blue lines and all the white pips. And I said, that is all the incident radio frequencies that are touching me in my office from everywhere around me. The office is upstairs, the guy across the street who has a router. We live in a soup of RF. Also, one other thing, and I'm going to give it back to you. I'm sorry for being so verbose, but this is something I'm passionate about. We know if you take a cellular telephone call a half hour before bed, deep sleep latency can be extended all the way out for additional 2 hours. So in other words, instead of going right into deep sleep like you're supposed to, you may not go into deep sleep until 2.5 hours after your head hit that pillow. So think about your children for a second. They're living in a soup of RF. Guess what poor sleep leads to in young children? ADHD. How many kids are on Ritalin when they wouldn't even need it if they weren't sleeping in a soup of RF? I'm done now. But I mean, I'm passionate about this because I have worked with RF. I know what it can do.
Yeah, this is really an important topic, and that was the reason why EWJ had to go into this study, reviewing latest science on radio frequency radiation, right? So one of the key takeaways from our study is the fact that the FCC exposure standard for radio frequency radiation is outdated, right? And they ought to be updated with the latest science to actually protect the general population, especially our children. I have 2 children, to protect our young children, right? So we are kind of proposing, a guideline for children to be 200 to 400 times lower, than the current FCC whole body exposure limit. And what you were kind of narrating is really important. This is really an important issue because we cannot just avoid exposure, to radio frequency exposure, but there are simple steps you can always take, like when you're not using your wireless devices, take it away from your body. Like, try to limit your children's use of wireless devices because they tend to play with it and they tend to spend so much time on it and
Right.
exposing themselves to radio frequency radiation, right? And if they're not, like you suggested, they can always put them in airplane mode, right? When not in use. Try not to have your Wi-Fi router in your bedroom. Try not to have your wireless devices under your pillow. Most of our teenagers these days, tend to have their wireless device, that are cell phones, under their pillows. This is really
Right.
not encouraged, because of the amount of radiation that is being emitted from these devices. So we are encouraging everybody listening to this to, take simple steps, to reduce your exposure to radio frequency radiation, because there are tons of research, linking this form of radiation to adverse impacts. And I know our regulatory agency need to start looking into this because effects are real. They are not just man-made.
The thing that's sad is, like, at night when we go to bed in my house, I unplug the router, I unplug the cordless phone. Nobody leaves their phone on, because even if your phone's in standby mode, it's constantly transmitting, it's constantly talking to the system. But I have no control over my neighbors. I have no control over the cell tower that's linearly a quarter mile from my home. So even if you take these precautions, so if the answer by the FCC is, okay, we'll put out a statement, don't let your kids play with their phone for more than an hour, do these things, it's not going to solve the problem, because the RF is literally raining down upon us. The only thing we're going to be able to do is to build RF-proof homes, so that when you're in your home, you can't feel you can't be exposed to the radiation. But then your Wi-Fi is not going to work, your cell phone's not going to work, because it's going to be basically not receiving any signals anymore. And people won't want that. They got to check I got to check Instagram. I got to check Instagram again. Hold on, let me check Instagram again. So it's going to be very difficult. This is going to be very painful.
Yeah, it's kind of a challenging situation for every one of us. Like I said, let's do the needful, those simple steps that we can all take, in the meantime, is really encouraged, is highly encouraged, since we cannot control, the installation of cell towers, where they are, and all those things, but the wireless devices we use every day, we can as well, take these simple steps of taking them away from our body, making sure that we don't really place our phone, against our head when we are answering calls. Like I tell people, I encourage my colleagues, you can even test more and talk less, right? If you must actually talk, you can even use your wired headset,
Right.
or even put it on speaker mode. These simple steps, when you kind of get to do them, they add up to actually reduce any adverse impact that one could have been exposed to radio frequency radiation.
Yeah, and I put my phone in airplane mode when I put it in my pocket. Drives people crazy because they text me or they call me and they can't get an answer. But also, I'm a huge proponent of, I think that we should flip the switch, the main breaker, turn all the power off in the house, but then the air conditioner, right? We have to start wiring homes differently, where people can turn all the wireless stuff off with the flip of one switch. We really need to start doing this. It's going to get worse. There's so many problems, tumors, cancer. There's lots of emerging studies that even show. I asked Dr. Blaser, my last guest, before he came on, there's a study that shows that exposure to cellular telephone radiation changes the diversity of the microbiome. And that's his thing, the microbiome and antibiotics and stuff. He says, he's not aware of that, but it doesn't surprise him. So I predict 100 years from now, they're going to come back and say, man, just like tobacco, just like everything else. Wow, we really made a big mistake. And your children, they're being molded right now. And the RF that you're exposing them to is molding them in a way that you don't want them to be molded. I can guarantee you that.
Yeah, that's the reason why we are kind of proposing that, FCC try to like update these current exposure standards to 200 to 400 times what they currently have it for the whole body exposure, because our children needs to be protected against any form of adverse impact, right? You wouldn't want to feel guilty growing up seeing your child turning out to be something else you did not plan it for, right? So like I always tell my kids, there is always limit to everything because of your health. You want to protect your health. You want to make sure that they are healthy. You don't want to blame yourself for any form of, let's say, neurological disorder that may occur due to letting them play around with wireless devices. So children's health is important. They are really important. Even adult health too. It's not just children, even the grown-ups too. Our health needs to be protected against this radio frequency radiation, because like you always mention, the effect is numerous. Like it is beyond what we can even think about. I've read a couple of reports about when people go closer to, let's say, cell towers, they tend to be sensitive. Electro hypersensitivity. There are a lot of things that go. You may not necessarily notice it, but there is a long-term impact of this exposure when you look at it.
Well, and so here's a little bit of critical thinking. We store iron in our blood and in our cells, and iron attenuates RF. It's an it can be used for an antenna. So every one of your cells has iron in it. Every one of your cells is affected by the RF that you live in. That's all I'm going to say. Now, people are going to say, oh, yeah, but what does it matter? It doesn't do anything. Oh, no, it's doing something. You just may not know it for another decade, but it's doing something.
Yeah, I totally agree, because a lot of those in vivo studies have shown that there are a lot of biological mechanisms for which radio frequency, radiation exerts its effect. Right? It could lead to changes in your reactive oxygen species. It could affect your intracellular enzymes, gene expressions. It could, affect your voltage gated calcium channel. There are a lot of pathways through which radio frequency radiation exerts this harmful effect in human beings. So we shouldn't really take that for granted. We need to take all the precautions to actually protect our young ones from the adverse impact. Like I said, it's not something you might probably see now. It's more like a long-time effect. What you're going to be seeing the next 10, 15, 20 years to come. And that's the reason why protecting our children is really important, because they are growing and they have so many years to live. And if we don't protect them now, their life in the next 20 or 25 years will be impacted because of our exposure or their exposure to radio frequency radiation.
There's a lot of parents out there right now who have children who have disorders like autism, who are afraid to die because who's going to take care of my child? I mean, this is possibly one of the saddest scenarios I've ever heard. A parent in their 80s and 90s worried about dying because this adult child here, right? This child is now 40 and 50, can't take care of him or herself. So they have to make accommodations that when they die, this child will be taken into a home. This is, I can't help but think that we have pooped where we live way too long. It's like we have really crapped on the environment. We've crapped on the water. We think we're invincible. We're human. Oh, we know better than nature. And it's going to come back to haunt us. And it's going to be a horrible, horrible time when it does. So has the FCC heard your requests? Have they responded? Have you sent this to them yet?
So currently, we are in the process of engaging them, letting them know about the study and all that. So we're in the process of engaging the FCC on this critical issue.
Good. I hope that they listen. But that they're like the FDA and others, they can't do anything until the industry that they provide oversight to agrees. Like when they said, oh, BPA, well, the industry said, give us some time to find a replacement. And the FDA said, okay. They didn't say, oh, no, you got to take this stuff out. These organizations like the FCC, they're the tail. They're the tail. They're not the dog. And so if you send this to them, the cellular companies, the wireless companies are going to go, look, you're going to have to give us 50 years to solve this problem. And they're just going to keep saying, okay, we're working on it. We're working on it. They don't move fast.
Yeah, one of the strategies we're also using is to educate the public about this important issue, right? Because when the public is educated, they'll be able to speak up. They'll be able to say, no, you guys need to change something about this, because a lot of people are suffering from its effect. So apart from engaging the FCC, the goal is to educate everyone about radiofrequency radiation, letting them know there are adverse impacts associated with this, and we need to do everything we can to reduce our exposure to radiofrequency radiation.
The problem right now, Uloma, is that the parents use this phone as a babysitter. The kid leaves me alone when he's on his tablet. It's going to be hard for the parents to give up their lifestyle versus their child's future health. It's going to be hard.
Yeah, I know it's kind of challenging because I am a mom too. I have two of them right in the house, and let's say you're working from home, you want that time to yourself to do your work, do your cooking and all those things, and you want to just keep your child busy with your phone. But remember, there are a lot of consequences. Afterwards. So I know it's hard on us as mothers, as parents, to engage our children, not really giving them the wireless devices to use, but we can always try. You can always try.
You have to. Be the parent. My mother, when I used to complain to my mother about my kids, she used to say to me, just be the parent. Like, tell them no. Tell them no. What are they going to do? What are they going to do? Go on strike? They're going to go to their bed. They'll go to their room and pout, and they leave you alone. Just be the parent. Be the parent.
One thing I do for my children is, instead of giving them my wireless devices, I try get them a lot of toys they can play with, or get them a backyard, or even take them out to the field, let them run around. By the time they are done running around and they come home, they're tired, they're all going to bed, right?
That's the best
so there are other things you could engage your child with, not necessarily the wireless devices. Come on, you have to look out for them for the next 10 or 15 years. Exposing them to this wireless device, is it going to pay you off in the next 10 to 15 years? No. So it's better for us to try our best. I know most of the time we're kind of guilty, as mothers. I can tell you, I can feel parents' pain. When you want to engage with a child, you have work to do, you have cooking to do, you have a lot of activities you need to get upon, but we can always try. Give yourself the best shot and protect your child's health.
Dr. Uloma Uche from Environmental Working Group. Thank you so much, and your organization. Thank you for all the things that you guys do. It's fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
Take care.
Bye.
All right, so that's it for today. I do have a show tomorrow. Tomorrow's Friday. Oh, we have a show with Bioptimizers. I'm going to have Wade Lightheart on the show tomorrow, talking about something exciting. I don't know what yet. They send me the information tonight, and I'll read up on it. But I know it's about a new supplement that they have. And also, don't forget Dr. Martin Blaser. His book, Missing Microbes, is very, very important to read if you have children, if you're planning on having children, or if you yourself wants to understand more about your own microbiome. It's a fantastic book. Did that interview in 2014 originally. If you want to go listen to the original interview, it's show number 1392 from April of 2014. All right, see everybody tomorrow with more Superhuman Radio. Thank you for being here today.